But what is hardly ever recognized is how significantly the teachings of Jesus also parallel other teachings totally from outside the Jewish tradition, especially Eastern traditions. The teachings of the Buddha Gautama and of Christ Jesus were both world subverting. They both taught a way of life that had transformed themselves and which would also bring about a profound transformation in those who followed it. This way of life was far more important than just knowledge. However important knowledge undoubtedly was as a basis. The similarity between Jesus and the Buddha lies mainly in this way with a capital W, this system of behavior that they both advocated as central to everything. This way would open up one to an entirely new way of being, and the teachings only pointed towards that way. They were not the heart of the matter. There are enormous differences between the teachings of Jesus and the Buddha. Jesus was an ardent campaigner for social change in a way that the Buddha never was, in the sense that he stood in the true tradition of the prophets of Israel, who had all campaigned to their peril for deep social change. And yet the systems of teaching of Jesus and the Buddha show uncanny similarities. It's beyond doubt that the fact lends credibility to the view that Jesus lived in India and Tibet and came into contact with the Buddhist and Hindu teachings there. In a true sense, these are questions that a perceptive person would still be asking today, even if the scrolls discovered by Nicholas Notovich and similar documents about the life of Jesus in the Far East had never existed or had never come to light. We would still have to ask those questions today because of the character of Jesus' teachings and how close they are to that of the Buddha. It was not the custom, of course, of Jesus normally to quote the Jewish prophets by name. And needless to say, he never quoted the Buddha by name either. But even if the Buddha by name is never quoted by Jesus, would it surprise you to know that some of the most famous parables of Jesus are also found in the writings of the Buddha, some 550 years before? The famous parable of the sower, found in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, tells of how a sower cast his seed and how it fell on a range of different soils with very different results. The Buddha told it 500 years before. The parable of the treasure in the field is also found in the Buddha's writings. So is the admonition that though heaven and earth should pass away, his words would never pass away. The statement of Jesus about how easily we see the speck in our brother's eye and fail to see the beam in our own, which is in St. Luke chapter 6, is found also in the teachings of the Buddha. He says, the faults of others are easier to see than one's own. The faults of others are easily seen, but our own faults are hard to see. That's in the Udanavarga, section 27. The admonition of Jesus to do unto others as you would have them do to you is also found in the teachings of the Buddha. Jesus said that whoever looked on a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Buddha said, commit no adultery. The law is broken by even looking at the wife of another man with lust in the mind. In Hindu, the Lord Krishna says, I am the letter A. I am the beginning and the end. While in the Christian book of Revelation, Jesus the Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Both Krishna and Jesus tell their disciples that he will dwell with them and they in him. Jesus says in Luke's Gospel, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Luke chapter 6. The Buddha gives exactly the same advice in the Hemima Nikaka, verse 21. Jesus said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. The Buddha said, hatred does not ever cease in this world by hating, but by love. This is an eternal truth. Overcome anger by love. Overcome evil by good. Overcome the miser by giving. Overcome the liar by truth. And Jesus said, just as you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. Matthew 25. While the Buddha says, if you do not tend one another, then who is there to tend you? Whoever would tend me should tend the sick. The image of the poorly built house is found in both. The emptiness of ritual washings to purify oneself is found in both. And both the Buddha and Jesus were accused of luxurious living because they never practiced a harsh asceticism. Because they knew that what needs to be disciplined in the human being is not the body, but the mind. So it makes no sense to punish the body. Other parables told by Jesus come not from the sayings of the Buddha, but from the Hindu traditions before the time of Jesus, which includes the statement of Jesus that if you had faith like a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Moving mountains is a lingua franca of the great mystery schools. Reminiscent of the wedding at Cana, the Buddha and his disciples were invited to a wedding, and instead of the food being consumed as the guests ate it, it actually grew in quantity and fed the multitude that eventually turned up at the feast. The story of the widow's mite in Mark 12 is replicated in the teachings of the Buddha. In fact, it's replicated so closely that it would be almost impossible to maintain that both stories were independently created. Jesus often spoke disapprovingly of those who had a thirst for miracles, and so did the Buddha. Once, when the Buddha met a yogi who had spent 25 years of intense concentration trying to learn how to walk on water with no tangible result, the Buddha asked him why he had wasted his time on such a small thing, when all he needed was a small coin and the ferryman would have taken him across the river in his boat. Just as the saintly old man Simeon prophesied the birth of the Messiah and held Jesus in his arms as a babe, so the Buddha's birth is prophesied by the saintly old asceta. As Jesus was lost in the temple and was found discoursing with the doctors, so the Buddha wandered away and was lost in contemplation before his family found him again. Both began to preach at the age of 30, and both had 12 disciples. Both called their first disciple when he was sitting under a fig tree. Both had a favorite disciple, and both had one who betrayed him. Need I go on? A.J. Edmonds, for instance, maintains that there are 112 parallels to the Buddha's teaching in the texts of the Christian Gospels. Was this an accident? From another perspective, there are uncanny similarities between the Catholic and the Buddhist and Hindu practices. The rosary, the veneration of relics, ascetical practices, the ceremony of baptism, the ceremony of confession of sins, the celibate clergy, etc. All of these are of Indian origin. There is an uncanny similarity between the fundamental Catholic practices and those of Tibetan Buddhism. The majestic prologue of the fourth Gospel, the Gospel of John, begins with the statement, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." What do the Vedas say? In the beginning was Brahman, with whom was Vak, or the Word, and the Word was Brahman. A direct quotation from several centuries earlier. Do you still maintain it was impossible for Jesus to have lived in India?